is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Deadwood, Season 1, Episode 9, No Other Sons or Daughters. In this episode, it's time to form a small, ad hoc, informal government, and the worst person in the world is mayor, and I just am very worried for this township overall. The fact that we keep being assured this is temporary makes it worse somehow. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha, and thank you very much to Patrick for commissioning this episode. This episode, the pattern here, it seems, with this show tends to be there is an episode that is really heavy in terms of conversation and building tension between parties, and then there is an episode that is focused a lot on action and things coming to a head somehow. So this episode is really focused on conversation and the potential of things, I feel like is the way that I want to say this. And it is really kind of like, it's one of those moments where I realize, and I've said this before, especially in the last couple of years, as a child, when you hear about how the government works and you understand the basics as explained to you in class, you really take it for granted that things are being done the way that they are being done because it is the smartest way to do them. And as you get older and you start to learn more about the world, you begin to realize that not only is the smartest method not the priority in any way, but that if you were going to compare the way a lot of governments are formed to anything, it's the most similar to a group of children in a clubhouse in the woods making shit up as they go along. And it's really frightening once you start to realize that our most official institutions that we put our lives into and our welfare into are run that way. It's just very disillusioning. And that's not to say that there's anything that in the end wasn't invented by a person. But what I mean to say when I talk about making it up as we go along is things like gerrymandering, for example. We're just going to put the borders wherever we feel like it because we want to win, and we're going to make these absurd, nonsensical boundaries to ensure that the voters we want are included in our district and the ones we aren't are not included. And the fact that that is allowed, that we permitted this to happen, when I found out that was a thing, it was like my brain did not comprehend the words I was reading. I remember like learning about it. I think I was in like 8th grade or something. And I just was like, there's something about this that I'm clearly not understanding because this sounds just like they can do whatever they want. And once I like started to go to college and study this stuff a little more and realize that's indeed exactly what it is. They can do whatever they want. And who is going to stop them? The question, who is going to stop them, comes up more and more and more. And this episode is a lot about that for me because Deadwood is being created as a response to it's all backed on bribes and the promise of we will just leave you alone as long as you are established enough and as long as you pay us enough. And that fact is incredibly depressing for me in a lot of ways, that there was not a government formed because it was the smart thing to do. There was not a government formed because we felt the need for some law and order here, and people were getting fed up with the lawlessness of the place. There was not a government set up because there were established patterns of racketeering and murder, and it had started to draw the attention of the wrong people, and we all decided, okay, we need to start to get this under control. It is 100% purely because it's good for business for us to have this in place. The end. And that is so upsetting because you just want to believe so badly that these things are put in place because of the welfare of the people. And it's not true. And there was something very that really inspired a feeling of hopelessness in me watching this. And not to mention the entire conversation that Al has with the magistrate who comes to talk to him is about how this is going to be tough because we already made a treaty with the Sioux and we're going to have to figure out a way that we can just back on out of that. And, as a person living in the era that we do now, we know all too well that the idea of we have to figure out a way to back out of this treaty is code for just, we're going to back out of it and just, they can retaliate, but they won't win. And that's all it comes down to is, again, we can just do what we want. And this is the kind of shit that makes me a socialist. Because frankly, there are enough of us that don't agree with this method of running things that we could make our voices heard if we were organized and ballsy enough. But frankly, most of us are so worried about our day-to-day lives, understandably, I'm not criticizing anybody for that the idea of taking on something larger is overwhelming and frightening. And we're sure we're going to get crushed like bugs. And I don't think that we would be, but it's fucking, hearing about the Sioux getting all their shit taken after we promised them. It's just in real time, in quotes, in real time. It's one of those moments of incredible pain because of the utter unconcern of the men discussing it. The men with all the power don't give a shit. He says the Sioux people, and Al's response is, oh, people, is that what we're calling these cocksuckers now? And I was just and it's not inaccurate. It's not inaccurate. There is, dehumanizing people is a well-worn tactic for stoking division, hatred, and a feeling of otherness that justifies doing whatever you want to a group of people. And that's even true. And I'm not even talking about racially anymore, because racially goes so far back into the mists of time that we were doing this and separating ourselves from certain groups of people. Of course, that's true. But for right now, even things on social media, I don't know how many of you have run into this, but there are a lot of really gross right-wing boys that like to call people NCPs or NPCs, sorry, which is code for non-playable character. And what that means is that this is a character in a game that recites the same dialogue over and over like a broken record that you can't play or really interact with in any way. They are somebody who is there to do the same things and do this and bring up the same plot points over and over every time you play. And they will always be in the same place saying the same thing. So this thing of we're going to call human beings that we are talking to on the internet NPCs is meant to dehumanize them and imply that maybe they're not even real people. Maybe they're bots or something. It's just a strange and really ugly thing that I have seen a few times now. And I have seen it, disproportionately used against folks with a much more left-wing mindset. And it just feels really, we're doing this now? Snowflakes is falling by the wayside and NPC is the new thing. So anyway, I'm just, this was so hard to watch. And as much as I want there to be some law and order in Deadwood, as much as I wish that there was going to be some fucking consequences for murdering people, that's not what this is going to be about. This government it's created by the biggest murderers in the camp. They're the ones with all the power. They're the ones writing the rules, and they are the ones that will decide who the rules are enforced against. Tale as old as time. I just, guys, it was really depressing. I swear to God. So I'm going to back it up a little bit. We start off this episode with Al, and he is looking at the chunk of gold that Trixie has handed him. I forgot to mention at the end of the last episode that he forces Trixie to reveal the scar on her arm where she tried to commit suicide, and she slaps him in the face for it. And I loved that moment so much because it's not an indication of her being like unafraid of Al, because of course she is. She wouldn't be back here if she wasn't afraid of him. But it's an indication of her like drawing a boundary, basically, of just like, I have given you everything and you are going to leave me alone about this. Stop it. And he really looks at her in just shock. There's no dialogue in that entire scene. And lets it go. Just, she walks past him and gets undressed and gets into bed, and he doesn't reprimand her or try and fight back or anything. He just lets it go. And in the morning, he at first tries to express some hopefulness that the piece of gold that she's given him is the first of many, to which she's like, nope, don't get your hopes up. That is not how this is going to go. And he is kind of resigned. Like, I was going to be hopeful, but yeah, that does not surprise me. And then begins to tell her about what's going on with the magister coming to talk. And he's saying that you can't be afraid, because once you are irritated and you start to get upset by things, that means that your enemy has got you and they've won. So don't be afraid. And he keeps repeating this as if he's talking about Trixie, but obviously is saying it about himself. Like, I think he's just concerned about the appearance of being afraid in front of anybody. And it turns out, we find out later, that there is a bit of a reason to be afraid, because he has some other shit happening, and also the amount of the bribes is enough that it's going to be of some concern to him. But yeah, so this conversation and their interaction, he walks out after saying to her, don't try and do away with yourself again, all right? Which is honestly the thing about this scene that's like so heartbreaking in certain ways, is the fact that Trixie looks really pleased that he said this. Like, it means so much to her. And that is some bare fucking minimum shit. He doesn't say, I'd miss you. It's implied, of course, and that's what she's smiling at. But he doesn't actually say the words. He doesn't actually, make eye contact when he says it. And I think for her, that's the indicator that he means it. Because he is such a good shyster and a good liar and a fucking bullshit artist that if he sounded too sincere and was too connected when he said it, it would feel like he was fucking with her. But the way that he handles it so casually as he's walking out the door is just sort of, an indicator to her that he is more sincere and more upset by it than he wants her to see. And it's the kind of thing that I get really saddened by, because this is a real thing that a lot of women live with in terms of men who are not experienced with dealing with their emotions. And so women have to kind of like accept scraps in terms of actual adult conversations. They have to get like read between the lines about how somebody and you know, to a degree that's going to be human interaction, period, is that you have to read between the lines and you have to understand what the personality of the person you're speaking with is actually like to be able to judge what they're saying now. But it's something in particular with men because of how like the, you know, strictures of masculinity are so, it's emphasized so much that men are not to be emotional. And it's just a shame, you know, like that they aren't able to express what they really feel. And because women know that they are not allowed to, we have to like assign meaning to things that may not be there. I think in this moment, Trixie's assessment is correct. I understand her smiling the way that she does. But I also feel like it's such a shame that that's how it has to be. So we go from there to the restaurant, in quotes, where Ellsworth is meeting Alma for the first time. And it's Seth who has brought Ellsworth to introduce himself. And Sophia is also with her, and they're having breakfast. I love Alma's... This actress is really good at behaving as someone who is infatuated. Because as a person who has been infatuated, the change that comes over you from when you think you're alone to when the person that you are into appears, you see it in yourself. You start to stand differently. Your voice rises an octave all of a sudden because you're like nervous, but you're just trying to be cool. You can't stop smiling because just them being there is like just so delightful to you. There is so much about how her smile comes over her face that is genuine, you know. I just love and the glow that she has when she's talking to him. It's great. I love it so much. So he says to her that he's going to leave Ellsworth to explain it to her, and she gets this sort of like saddened look and then asks if she can speak to him. And they go off to the side, and she says to him, "I'm certain Mr. Ellsworth's are very capable hands, but I hope you're not disassociating yourself from my affairs." And he's kind of trying to be like, I'm not worried about you in this regard with this guy. I think you'll be able to handle it just fine. And I feel like that is him saying, I'm not disassociating entirely. It's just in this particular instance, I don't know what he knows. And me being here isn't necessarily very helpful. But he says, like, we will compare notes after and decide how to proceed. And she gets this, like, delighted look on her face that I just love. Like, it's a promise that they get to talk again. And I normally just hate romance in stories because it's not done well. And this is an example of it being done really well, where I know he's married. I know, and we find out later details about that change the circumstance quite a bit. But I know he's married, and so there is that awfulness of like, this can't possibly go anywhere good. This can't be resolved in a way that feels like it's, what's the word? That's satisfying or happy for anybody involved here. Unless his wife were suddenly to take sick and die and free him up. And, you know, that's not necessarily a better situation. I just don't, I still care so much about these two because they have such chemistry between the two of them. It's amazing. And her, like I said, face acting. And she is so incredibly beautiful, but very stately as well. And how she manages to get across this fluttering excitement at being around him, despite the fact that she is holding her body very rigid, that she is so restrained in her behavior, and yet it's leaking out of her smile and the way that she looks at him and everything. It's just so good. I just love it so much. This is romance done properly, even though it's like doomed, you know? So yeah. So he says, I lean more about what I felt from this fellow than what I saw before he takes off, which is a really interesting way of saying it. Just like, I've got a gut feeling, but I may be wrong, but we'll see. So then we get this fucking dude who comes in, who is a drunk, and he is apparently works for EB. I don't know what he does exactly. He just works in the kitchen, or he does laundry, or what. But this dude apparently was given a letter by Wild Bill Hickok to deliver to his wife, and it wasn't like he was going to bring it all the way to where it needed to go, but he was going to pass it on to like the next courier, I guess. And he doesn't do it because he gets so drunk that he forgets about it. And apparently what happens is sometimes he'll get so drunk that he'll shit himself, and he'll leave like pairs of clothes under the rock at the stream after rinsing them out. And there was a pair of pants that had the letter in the pocket. And he managed to somehow not get shit or water on this letter. And he hands it over to EB. And I have been racking my brain to figure out exactly who this letter, or what this letter could contain that makes it important. Because I feel like it has to be important. It wouldn't come up, and I don't know what it could possibly be. And EB is concerned about the fact that since he was like paid and given this friggin' letter and he never delivered it, that this is going to come across really badly to everybody. I can't tell if he really means it or not, or if he is trying to shame this man so much that he doesn't tell anyone else about the discovery of the letter, because it's going to be that he thinks there's going to be like consequences from other people. But whatever the case here, he seems pretty like worried about the fact that, and it's hard for me to tell whether or not it's real. So he snatches the letter away from the kid. He's not a kid. He's a full grown ass man. And sends him away. And I don't think we ever see this letter for the rest of the episode. I don't know if EB reads it. I don't know. You know, it's sealed, but it's sealed with wax. And if you have a heated, like, letter opener, you can get a wax seal up and then reseal it pretty easily. So, and I'm sure, 100% sure, EB is sneaky enough to know that. So I imagine this is going to get read, but I just don't know what he could have said in it that would be significant to the story. So then comes in Charlie Utter. Charlie is going to be a businessman. Apparently he's going to work in freight and also probably doing some courier service. I'm not sure when the U.S. Postal Service was established, but I imagine that this is before it was set up. I have to mention to the side that I know it's like a really goofy thing to be so admiring of, but the U.S. Postal Service is one of the most insanely organized, amazing things that I've ever seen. Like, if you think about the sheer volume of what they deal with every day, and do they get things wrong and lose stuff? Yeah, inevitably. That's going to happen. I mean, you know, I've gotten like envelopes that someone clearly opened because they thought there was a gift card or money in it, just because it was like a pop-up card and it felt weird. Like, this shit's going to happen. But the amount of stuff that you get via the mail with no problem getting directly put into a box in front of your personal home is crazy. And when I think back to the times before there was a postal service set up, that people were still able to send letters and that they got to where they were supposed to go with any measure of dependence, is just dependability, I guess is the word I want. That always blows my mind, that was like a system that ever worked. I can't imagine how many letters got lost and never arrived before there was a system in place, considering that still happens with a pretty decent system that's like automated and mechanical now. So yeah, the fact that this, like, just the idea of creating this sort of business, he's obviously like going to do pretty well probably. But the fact that you can just like pick up and be like, yeah, I'm going to deliver stuff and just be like one guy who's going to hire some people, I guess, is just, again, I'm struck by how much things are just made up as you go along. And people are just like, yeah, I guess we can do that, you know? So Charlie Utter comes in and he's got this like frock coat on and he's sort of self-conscious about it, which I found really interesting because I thought he looked great. And I don't know, later on, Jane says something about how it's like the stupidest outfit she's ever seen him in. And I feel like she must be just saying that because she knows him well enough to know that's going to really hurt his feelings. But I don't understand why he's so self-conscious about it. It's not like it's bright green or pink or something, you know, like it's a very sedate look and he's just so worried and it's sort of adorable. Like Charlie Utter throughout this episode, to be honest, is sort of adorable. There's a scene later with him and Joni, but first I want to talk about him coming over to talk to Ellsworth and Alma. And I really like Ellsworth is enjoying this little girl and playing with her a little bit while he's talking to Mrs. Gareth. I think is her name, Mrs. Garrett, but I call her Alma. But yeah, he is talking to her about the nature of the claim and how much she can depend on their being. And he says, listen, I'm somebody who really specializes in the panning and working in creeks to find the pieces that have like already come loose and are on the surface. Your claim is going to fucking need some serious prospectors that know how to sound things out by getting into the ground and driving stakes down and assessing. And I don't know how to do that. And she's very glad that he's like honest enough that he's honest enough to tell her that he's not the person for that job, that he doesn't have the knowledge or experience for that. And he asks her, do you have anybody that will have your back on this, basically? To which she's like, I mean, my family knows that what my circumstances are, my husband's family and my own. But as far as how they're going to be able to help me, I don't really have any idea on that. And he says something about how essentially what he's saying is, I may not be a professional at the process that I just described that I think you need, but even with my limited knowledge, I can tell that's going to be a lot of gold. And if you are looking at that kind of output, you're going to be someone who needs protection and needs people on your side, because it would be very easy to swindle you and it would be very easy to get you out of the way and just go down there and rip up what you can and run. It's essentially the danger that I had been thinking about to begin with earlier on, like a few episodes ago, was just like, if you're all alone, even if you find gold, what do you do? And the answer is you find people that you hope you can trust. And I say hope you can trust because that's the best you can do. You know, you can never, like, I am a firm believer in that there are people that are completely trustworthy out there, but it's not as easy to spot them as you'd think. And she is in a situation where when it comes right down to it, there aren't a lot of options open to her and there aren't a lot of people offering help, and there is going to be a point where she just has to go with what's available to her because she has no other choice. And I think, you know, when you reach that point, you're going to have to come to accept the fact that you're going to get a little bit cheated by someone. You're going to have to, like, be satisfied with, I'm going to get most of what's owed me, and acknowledge that likely there's going to be a person somewhere along the line skimming. And I just have to sort of be like accepting of the fact that that is inevitable. But yeah, I like this conversation between the two of them because I like Ellsworth, even though I don't understand why he ever told anybody that he saw the murder of her husband. I am concerned that that's going to come up, that he's going to not necessarily tell her, but that somehow it's going to get outed to her that he saw, and that he could have held, what's his face, responsible. I want to call him Doringer all the time. But yeah, that he could, I don't remember his name, but that he could have held him responsible for the murder because he was an eyewitness, and that she's going to feel sort of betrayed by that. But I'm hoping that that doesn't come up, because really, in the end, what does it matter? Like, even if you could be an eyewitness, everyone knows what Al's going to do to you. She has to know what Al would do to her or this guy, and respect the fact that he's going to try and save his own life. I mean, even if he held this man responsible for the murder, he is just a piece of Al's swear engine. He's like an arm, and Al will replace him and still wield the same kind of power. And it also won't bring her husband back to life. So I just kind of am low-key not wanting that to come to a head. So yeah, this is the point where Charlie Utter comes up and introduces himself to her and to Ellsworth, because he hasn't met either one of them before. The only reason that he has come to speak to them is because he recognizes a little girl, and it's just like, oh, she's being taken care of. That's cool. So yeah, Utter Freight and Postal Delivery Service. We see the sign that Al is staring at out his door, and he gets really irritated by it for some reason. That's what happens when you drop a fucking stitch. And this dude that he's talking to, Johnny, is so fucking stupid. And I love the fact that this keeps coming up, because I feel like it's setting the stage for something really ridiculous to happen with Johnny. I'm not over here trying to say that I want Johnny to die. All I'm saying is I don't care about Johnny. And if anything were to happen to him as a result of how idiotic he is and how impossible it is for him to like put two and two together, I feel like that is on him. And I'm just interested to see how this is going to pan out, because they didn't have the doc telling him, you are one stupid son of a bitch, aren't you? And they don't have Al despairing of whether or not he should like give Johnny any further responsibilities, because the kid does not necessarily seem like he is capable. I don't feel like they're doing any of this and then not going to pay it off at some point with something pretty big. But yeah, Al, this freight and delivery service should have been opened by Persimmon Phil as a cover for his other fucking activities. And he's thinking about how he could have gotten in on that, you know? I should have brought in a replacement is my fucking point. Well, you'll know better next time. The direction of my thoughts, with the sustained fucking stupidity that you're exhibiting, I hesitate to voice them, is that you might want to train for Phil's former position. And he freaks out and is so excited. And I love later on where he asks if he can... Sorry, Johnny freaks out and is so excited. I love when later on he asks Ellsworth, Al, if he can tell about the conversation that they just had and share with him the fact that he has been promoted, basically, to tell Doherty. And Al, just to fuck with him, says to keep him in the dark, even though it's obviously, it doesn't matter. Like, they're working together. Of course you should tell him. But there is something that is really petty in me that enjoys the fact that Al is just like, no, don't tell him. Just to kind of fuck with the dude, because he's like beaming with pride and wants so much to share it with somebody. And it's mean-spirited, but also really funny because it doesn't actually harm the dude in any way. Anyway, so then we have the conversation with him and the Magister, which I already talked about. And let's move beyond. Oh, yeah. And then the magistrate, I forgot about this too, tells him that you are wanted for murder in Chicago. And if things start to pick up speed here in Deadwood with you having a position of power in the town, you being wanted for murder may come up. May be something that gives people a little bit of pause. And if you want someone to help you out with that, I can do that. But it's going to cost you $5,000. And Al is just amazed at the fucking balls on this guy. I can't deny that there was something about how Al is cowed by this man that is really refreshing, because Al is so used to being able to just murder whoever is in his way. And the fact that this man has the power behind him that he does, that even Al cannot. It's sort of like the moment where we have Snape being evaluated by Umbridge, where you can't decide who you want to win. Like, there's something really wonderful about seeing Snape get taken down a peg, but also, like, Umbridge represents a bigger, worse power. So you, low-key, even though you're, like, enjoying seeing Snape squirm, you realize that in the grand scheme of things, it's not a good thing that this is happening, but you can't help but still sort of enjoy it. That's where I'm at with this. The look of shock on his face when he realizes that this guy is going to fucking take him for all he's worth, practically, is just priceless to me. So I'm going to briefly talk about the Reverend. I am very concerned about the Reverend. I'm not exactly sure what's happening. Like, we know, I think that he has a brain tumor, but I'm not entirely familiar with all of the symptoms of this. And there's something later on that Jane says to the doctor that indicates that she thinks there's something else going on. And she's not a doctor. So I don't know that she's necessarily saying that, like, you know, she has a particular theory. Only that it seems to her the doctor is paying attention to the wrong things. So the Reverend is, you know, trying, first of all, his eyes are like starting to go lazy. And that for me is something that I'm just like, I don't see on the screen, but I see like several people talking about it. So I just sort of let it go. And also there is the smell. And by smell, I mean imaginary smell that is not there, but that he thinks is there. He thinks that he smells like his flesh is rotting and like he has been, like he is already dead. And it's super morbid and sad, you know, like the whole question that he asks her about it. She takes it the wrong way and thinks that he's talking about smelling stuff because he's insinuating that she's been drinking and he can tell because he can smell whiskey on her breath, which is not at all what he's saying, but she's too fucking drunk to like, and too paranoid to really understand what the fuck he's saying to her. But yeah, this like moment is so, I don't know what to make of it because he's trying to act like he's not having these fits and everybody has seen it more than once. So I don't know who he thinks he's fooling. And then he tries to act like he's going to help her and he picks up this like tub of water, but he can't hold it properly because one of his arms isn't working and he doesn't want to face the fact that his arm isn't working. And, you know, in this era, when there isn't running water, getting water is a pain in the ass. So when she sees him spilling all of this water, she gets very upset and winds up sort of knocking him down. And she has a talk with him and just basically says, you need to go see to the doctor. You need to find out from him what the hell is going on because you keep avoiding this. And you can't avoid it forever. This shit is, you know, this is something that you're going to have to face eventually. So I'm going to jump ahead to her talking to the doc about it because he says something like, you know, if you are waiting for me to tell you to stop drinking, I am finally going to fucking say it. I wish to God that you would stop drinking because you are going to fucking die. You're going to kill yourself. And of course she freaks out and is just like, I don't give a shit. I haven't been waiting for you to say anything and I'm not you know, the whole thing. But then she finishes it off with this any other fucking thing concerning me. And I love that Charlie's watching this whole thing. And then so you can go fuck yourself, and don't try and hasten anyone anywhere, because everyone follows their own fucking pace, and don't try and fucking hasten them. And if you happen to be, and you happen to be fucking overlooking that you think it's just one day after another with the same fucking seizure as if it happened the week before, and that just shows you how much you fucking know and what you pay attention to. So I want to know what the hell that means. Like, and the doctor really seems to hear her. He's not a stupid man, you know? He's probably the fucking smartest person in this damn camp. And he seems to really be like, what am I missing? And I'm interested to see what that turns out to be. Because I don't, like, later on when he does talk to, I'm going to fast forward to that part because I just want to pretty much, like, cover what's going on with them. She tells him being sick ain't nothing to be afraid of. And then he does the, like, follow my finger sort of thing with, like, keep your eyes on it, but don't move your head to judge whether or not. And then this is when he says, I apologize for the smell. What is it that you smell? As if I've died. And the matter-of-factness with which he presents this is so disturbing to me. I smell my flesh rotting. It isn't rotting, Reverend. Your flesh does not smell. You have not died. You're having organic changes in your mind that's making you believe these things. Do you understand me? And Reverend looks saddened by that. Like, really, this is the first time we've seen him not with that weird little smile that he always has, that on anyone else I feel like would be really, really creepy, and for some reason he manages to just stay this side of creepy. I remember when the word took me as I read scripture, people felt God's presence through me, and that was a great gift that I could give to them. Now the word does not take me when I read, nor do I feel Christ's love. When he said this earlier to Jane, she was just like, well, join the fucking club. But his feeling here is that, like, not only do I not feel it, but because I don't, other people don't either. The not knowing my purpose is my portion of suffering. And the doc says, well, is there any pain other than the pain of not knowing your purpose? And he says, no. I smell things. There are parts of my body that I can't feel. And his love is gone. But I don't have actual pain. And the doctor just straight up asks, do you want to keep alive? Because I could give you something and it would send you on your way and you could be free of this. And the Reverend says, this is his will, and I need to, endure it. And the doctor says, well, if this is his will, then he is a son of a bitch. And the Reverend does not contradict him at all. Just looks at him. And the doctor says goodnight and leaves. But there's something about that moment that I feel like broke the Reverend a little bit. I feel so bad for this guy. I really do. So, all right, I have to speed things up a little bit. I'm taking too long as usual talking about all these little things. But I like the Reverend, and I just never expected to like him as much as I do. So, all right, I'm going to talk about Joni. Joni is deciding that she is going to go ahead and try her hand at her own business, despite the fact that it's artificial freedom. I guess she feels like, I know I'm not getting the real thing, so I may as well take what I can get. And Eddie, as it turns out, and I was, seeing this last episode finally, and this episode it's made very explicit, Eddie does not like Cy, does not trust Cy, feels like Cy really crossed the line in the way that he dealt with these kids. And that's interesting to me, because I had been saying in the last episode, maybe this is them having seen this all before. But it seems that this moment with Cy and these two kids is not something they've seen before. That they have maybe known he had the capability to do this, but that they weren't ever faced with it, head on the way they are here. And what he winds up doing, and the fact that he does it in her room, feels to them like an extra slap in the face, to both of them. Like, she's not even willing to sleep there anymore. That's part of why she's decided to get her own business, is like being here in the room where they were shot is just too fucking much. It's upsetting. So yeah, when she goes and tells Eddie about that, he seems like really hopeful for her, to the point that he gets brought to that meeting later and says something about like, well, if women pay the same like business fines, are they going to be able to enjoy the same rights for their businesses as men are? And Cy looks at him like, I can't believe that you're bringing this up right now. And somebody else is like, what does that have to do with anything? And he winds up leaving it alone. I think mostly the looks that he's given by everybody are sort of like, why are you here again? And that's just enough to just shut him up. But I like Eddie. He's willing to just sort of face off with Cy in a way that I didn't expect. I don't know what their relationship is other than colleagues, if there's any like blood there or not. But Joni, she goes off to try and like see if there's an area that would be good for her to set up her own brothel. And she fucking runs into Charlie Utter in one of the most charming, unassuming little scenes that's so funny and so sweet. And I'm not like saying that I ship her and Charlie romantically, but I low-key want her to get involved in Charlie's business dealings or something. Like, I want them to like work together. I feel like Cy would not take well to that. Her having her own thing, that's one thing. Another man sort of stepping in and taking his place, he would not be okay with that. But the two of them, he like introduces himself on the street as she's walking by. And it's just like, I'm opening this business. And she's like, oh, well, good for you. And then he asks her what she thinks of his coat. And she's just like, well, I think it looks nice. If you asked me, I think I could tell that this isn't something that you normally wear. You don't look at ease in it. But I think it's cut well and fits well. And basically they just go back and forth about everything until she mentions, I'm surprised you're not at that big meeting. And I love this so much because he tries to play it off like, oh, yeah, the meeting, totally. No, I'm heading over there, even though he obviously was not invited and doesn't know about it. And when she realizes that he was not invited and doesn't know about it, she promptly, like, figures out a way to give him the information in a way that sounds like she's just making conversation, when in fact she's giving him the details of where it's being held and why. So I just love this, that she's like, kind of trying to be nice to him, and he is trying to be nice to her out of simple loneliness. I think Charlie wants a friend. He misses fucking Wild Bill as much as Wild Bill was like impossible to deal with and kind of let himself get killed. I think there is something about the way that he is grasping at Joni and grasping later at trying to get Jane involved in his business that makes me feel like he just needs somebody. And I really want, that's part of why I want Joni to get involved, is that I want him to have somebody, and I can't think who else would like, partner up with him. Who else is free and not exactly attached to something already. Anyway, so yeah, the two of them, it's just great, and I love. The meeting, EB becomes mayor, which just, and I love the fact that, Seth becomes like the head of the board of health, because it turns out the doc, who they all assumed was going to be the head of the board of health, has been arrested for grave robbing. And so he would not be an appropriate leader. And in that era, grave robbing was rampant, like really, really bad, because you had people trying to understand the human body and using corpses to do it, and they would pay for fresh corpses. So there were people who would just go out and, figure out who had just been buried and drag the corpse over to a doctor who would pay for it. And if he's been arrested for grave robbing, maybe he was going out and doing it himself, or maybe he was arrested for it in like working with someone by paying them for the body afterwards. But whatever the case, that is one of the more realistic and funny aspects of the show to me, because if you look into anything about like the history of medicine, grave robbing was such a huge part of it that it's kind of shocking. And that's why, like, donating your body to science has become a thing that some people are willing to do. And I would absolutely do that, you know, because what do I care? Go ahead, do whatever. But I just really like the idea that the show is so concerned with being, like, as historically accurate as they can. And maybe the doctor is based on a real person, and this is true of that person. But whatever the case, it was a nice detail that, like, kind of delighted me. And I liked it a lot in part because of how surprised everyone else was by it, because they obviously all respect the doctor so much. So yeah, we have this moment that I kind of skipped over because it made me really uncomfortable. But I was talking about Eddie and the way that he was, like, talking back to Cy. And later on, Cy kind of gets back at him because it turns out that either Charlie is gay or Charlie is a pedophile. And it's hard for me to tell what's true here because then, as now, people love to conflate being gay with being a pedophile, even though they are completely unrelated things. And the way that Cy talks to him about it, it's unclear to me which one it is. But Cy seems to either he really believes this or he doesn't, and he's just saying it to be cruel. But he's poking and prodding at the fact that it seemed that Eddie had a thing for the young boy that was shot, Miles. And I don't know if this is genuine or not, but all that he is doing is bringing up Miles and talking about, like, how he could have fucked this kid if Cy had left them alone. And maybe that's part of why he's really angry that Cy didn't give him an opportunity to rape the kid before he shot him to death. I never saw a look on your face like I saw on your face the other day, including when I've smacked women around. And he says, I was never in a room with you where you were going to kill somebody. And he says, I gave that up a long time ago. All I ever wanted was for you to be comfortable so when you open your mouth in public, I don't have to fucking worry about what's going to come out. So let me get you some kid to fuck in the ass or whatever to get you comfortable so you'll shut the fuck up. And he says, fuck you, Cy. That's where I draw the line. Friend or no friend. The whole thing is really ugly. And the shame, the way that Eddie's head is bowed, is just hard to watch. I hate Cy. I really hate him. Like, Al is a bastard. But there's something about Cy that is a lot less about the business and a lot more about the cruelty. There is something about Cy that feels like he is getting off on the power, and that's the thing that he enjoys about this. Whereas Al is just greedy. Al just wants what he wants, and he's going to do whatever he needs to do to get what he wants. And in that, he is very ruthless. But Cy is somebody who enjoys bullying people. Yeah, the whole thing is just, it's a really hard scene to watch. And I like Eddie in the end, he says it like, you know, I wish that you weren't such an evil cocksucker as he walks away. And I have to admit that I respect that Eddie still has his fucking spine straight back by the end. Like, there's a minute there where he's really cowering, but he comes back to himself and it's just like, you know what? This is fucking garbage. And he's still involved with Cy. Like, there's no getting out for him either for whatever reason. But I just really enjoyed that he's still kind of defiant in the end. So, all right. We have finally, because Jane rejected Charlie Utter's request that she join up with his business initially. But when he finds her outside, like asleep on the street, basically drunk, he then is like, why don't you just come inside and sleep, for Christ's sake? And of course, initially she's like, no, I don't need anything from you. But finally, it becomes clear that she is like, she's sleeping outside of his place specifically because she wants to have a chat with him. And it's interesting. She's decided that she's going to leave and she wants him to tell Bill about it. And I'm like, really wishing, if you're going to leave, why don't you just work for him and then do like deliveries and stuff? And then you would have to hardly be in camp at all. And you'd have like a steady, you know, but she doesn't want to do that. And I'm worried about her and what's going to wind up fucking happening to her. All right. So let's end this with the conversation between Seth and Alma, because this is significant to me. He sits down with her, and this is obviously them talking about the prospects of what's happening. He tells her that it's time for him to get his wife and child to the camp. And she's trying to be cool about that because she knows that he's married. She's aware of this. I wasn't sure if she was, but, you know, in the end. And she's trying to suss out just how serious things are. She says, oh, you have a son as well? And then later on, at the end of the conversation, he mentioned that his brother died in the war. And when she asks later, can I ask you why you brought up your brother in the conversation? Right before he leaves, he says, well, my wife was my brother's widow, and my child is their child, which to me feels like him saying, I'm not in love with her. I did not pick her. I married her because of obligation and because it was the right thing to do to keep something from happening to her, and because his child needs to be taken care of and kept in the family. But what's between me and her is not necessarily something that's meaningful to me. And the look that passes between them when he tells her that, and the way that she reacts when she closes the door, like, that meant something significant to her. And she's got tears in her eyes. I feel like this is him opening the door a little bit. And I am really curious as to what's going to happen here. So, yeah. I'm dying. I really want to know. Guys, what's gonna happen? But I just really like the two of them together. I just do. I really want things to work out between them. Even though I don't see it happening, I just want it to. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I'm sorry that I didn't give every piece of this story this time the time it deserved, but there were certain things that I just wanted to talk about so much. And I'm excited to watch the next one. I'm recording Monday and Friday. And then there's, I think the third week in the month, Patrick has commissioned 2 in a row. So I will be watching and recording on 2 episodes in a row. And that will be very interesting and something that I haven't done before. So I will let you all know about that once it's coming up. So that way, if you're watching along with me, you won't be caught by surprise. All right, everybody. Thank you again so much. Thank you, Patrick, for commissioning these. And I will see you again soon with a new episode. Toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.